Welcome to October's Inner Circle. Thanks for joining us again. Before we start, let's do the normal thing we do and go around and do introductions. Janet, let's start with you.
I was going to say morning, but it's afternoon already, isn't it? Afternoon, everybody. And I'm Janet Smythe from Inline Accounts, and really nice to be here. Thank you, Chris.
And what's going on in your world at the minute?
So yeah, I think similar to yourself, we are extremely busy and also recruiting. So we've got a new young lady starting in 2 weeks' time. So that's be good. We're hoping that's going to help to take up a bit of the slack. We did try the not bounce back loan. Got that in my head. I've been looking at bounce back loans. I've been looking at the Kickstart stuff, but I think there's such a long lead time on that, so I'm not sure that's going to work for us. But we've put an application in for it anyway. See how that pans out.
So we did, and we found that the lead time's about 8 or 9 weeks.
Right. Okay.
And then you've got the recruitment process on top of that. So it is a bit of a commitment just to get on the Kickstart scheme. It was interesting because we got to a point where we go, should we just leave it and just recruit? I don't know, it's difficult.
I'm not convinced, and I've heard sort of various feedback. I think I was on something the other day, and out of it was a chamber event with some other chamber areas. So you had like Barking, Dagenham, Redbridge, that sort of thing, and the feedback was it was probably 80% negative and 20% positive on the candidates. So again, it did leave me with a few doubts of whether it's going to work for us. But I've put the application in, and I'll probably just sort of wait and see what comes through then.
I think particularly in professional services, the quality of the people you employ is key, isn't it?
100%.
We went through so we used Kickstart, but we got introduced to somebody who wanted to join the business who had been unemployed for a period of time. So who could use the Kickstart scheme, but was recommended to us. So actually it worked really well.
Definitely.
In terms of the hurdles, I think I mentioned it at the event. In terms of the hurdles you've got to jump through, it's a little bit painful. And loads of bounce back loan stuff as well.
Is it? I've actually done a mortgage application, which are now asking about bounce back loan details through the company, even though it was an individual's, mortgage application for something, nothing to do with the company, but they still want to know, details of that, which. That's something else that's new coming through and exciting.
Is that because it was a sort of consultancy business, sole trader consultancy?
Not particularly, no, it wasn't. But the director wants to draw some funds from the company to fund the deposit, which he has got in the company, which are his funds sitting in the director's loan account. But they are looking more into the affordability then of the company once the funds are drawn out. So the liabilities are then taken into account. So a whole new host of questions that we never used to have to address.
Interesting. We'll see how that. I can sort of understand as well, though, right? Because it's one of those things where I don't think mortgage lenders want the buffer of bounce back loans to be used.
I think exactly. But it's very difficult to say, okay, had that money in and it's been used, and the respect to which it's been used, which it has, genuinely been used to sort of to restock. Who's to say that the next pot of money that's sitting there, where's that come from? Is it first in, first out, last in, first out?
Well, it all goes into one in the end, doesn't it?
Exactly. So
interesting. All right, thanks, Janet. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Raymond, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. I was just listening to Janet, and also what I've heard is that banks, when they come in mortgage applications, are taking into consideration anyone who was given any kind of grant or support during, and not looking at it very favourably.
Okay.
So they're actually considering it as it's kind of counting against the applicants.
Why would that be, though?
Well, I think it's been seen as cash taken to support themselves, as in kind of, I think that's the challenge with the bounce back loan. Many businesses, there are a lot of zombie businesses out there that have actually taken the bounce back loans and lived through the pandemic with the bounce back loan supporting them. And I think if you're any funder at the moment, I can appreciate why you would be a little bit nervous, should we say.
Yeah, I agree. And what issues are arising with your clients at the minute in your life?
Well, two things: funding and recovery loans, because everyone wants to talk about recovery loans at the moment. So we've just gone through, we don't need a recovery loan, we need something different. Well, until we stop having this conversation about recovery loans, we still need to talk about recovery loans.
Yeah.
And the second thing is structure of business. And this has come up for two of my clients in particular, with the husband and wife, where the wife fundamentally runs the business, whilst the husband is actually the primary salesperson in the business. And we're finding that as their businesses are coming back and they're starting to grow, the roles that they have where the other partners or directors are concerned need to be a little bit more formalized, unless we are the husband and wife that run this business, that we are the CEO and COO who run this business. Because we're starting to see a little bit of, as some of these smaller businesses start to get a bit more growing and they start to come back a little bit, there's a little bit of friction around, well, it was the husband and wife that were running the business originally. Well, no, it wasn't. It's just that they are husband and wife.
Yeah. They've got their professional hats on, and that's slightly different in terms of the roles and responsibilities in the firm.
But it's also reminding some of the, in particular one client, that it is not his wife that he is talking to. Sometimes it is the person who is responsible for the business that he is talking to. So that has been really quite interesting.
Have you got a wiretap into my office, Raymond? Because that's like that might be part of some of the conversations that we have. Sarah, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Sarah Steele. I'm the owner of a business called Better with Money, and we provide financial education in the workplace, really to help people understand their personal finance and to reduce money stress, because of course for a lot of employers, they understand the link between people's mental health and financial stress, which is why a lot of employers actually have budgets set aside to provide things like financial education. So it's been a really interesting couple of years, actually. Particularly, I actually only took the business on at the beginning of the pandemic, about 3 days before, actually, so I didn't know we were going into lockdown. So most of our work now is all done online through webinars. We do online one-to-ones for people. None of it is advice. It's not regulated. It's just, I mean, myself and the people I've worked with have all been advisors in the past, but it's really just that financial friend, because most people just want to say, I've got a bit of money and I don't know where to save it, or I haven't got enough money and what debt should I be paying off first, or how do I consolidate my debt? So we're sort of that critical friend, I guess, who just helps along the way. And just, well, lots, actually, one thing I was going to mention was the Kickstart scheme. And I think I mentioned this to you, Chris, because I was talking to a few people that were looking at that. And I think one of the things that you have to provide is training for that individual, whether that's work related or personal, sort of just enhancing what they know. And actually financial education can fit really neatly into that.
Okay.
And I've been looking at working with a group of employers who might, who independently might not want to pay for that. But if you've got a whole group of employers who've got Kickstart employees, about whether there's something we could do to help. So we really, what we're trying to do is help employees, regardless of whether they're just starting out in their work life, all the way through to people who are about to retire. And I think that's probably what sets us apart. And I know we've spoken about this a lot, Chris, but there's most people that do financial education have got something to sell, whether it's an ISA, whether it's a loan product, whether it's a bank account. So actually, I think the reason that we try to be different is that we don't have any associations with anybody else. We're just there to try and help the employee.
Yeah, just trying to help educate and inform people to make the right decisions. And I absolutely loved your appearance on Pension Geeks. That that stuff. There was a week. When was it, Sarah? Was it start
middle of September? It was
September. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a brilliant communications company they've called themselves Pension Geeks. And actually, they're not pension geeks at all. They're two people that just know how to do marketing and communications, who got so fed up that pensions were a bit of an enigma to most people, that they set up this company to make pensions as simple and easy to understand as possible. And then, so for 1 week a year, they do about 20 free sessions across the week. Anybody in the country can sign up to them and listen. And they get the pensions minister on there, and they get all different companies. And I was lucky enough to be invited to go and host one of the sessions, which was State Pension Explained. And we had about 2,000 sign-ups. Honestly, what I realised just how misunderstood the state pension is. I think mainly because the goalposts keep changing and the rules keep changing, and people have no idea what they're going to get or how they get it. So actually, we are now going to replicate that session for another week that's coming up, which is Talk Money Week, which is the 8th to the 12th of November. And again, we're going to be offering 2 free webinars to anybody that wants to sign up, for employees, employers. One's on state pension and one's on fixing your festive finances.
Are you sure you've got enough F's in there? I do love a bit of alliteration.
I love a bit of alliteration. Yeah, but just things like where people can get in the festive spirit for free. You don't have to spend loads of money on stuff. What can people access? Things like NORAD Santa and there you go. Yeah. You need to stop me talking. I'll keep going.
I'm confused. We're in October, right? We're in October. Can we keep that till like mid-November, December time? Is that allowed? I don't know. But certainly I'd recommend, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, I'd recommend you check out what the Pension Geeks did. I had it on the screen in my office. Sarah's one, I actually learned a lot, some elements, and it sparked conversation in our office about whether it's right to defer state pensions, when most of the time it's not actually, when you look at the numbers, but real interesting stuff around that. But there's loads of really good stuff around learning about money on that platform. So thanks, Sarah, really appreciate that. Michael, how are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Not too bad.
Good.
But listening to the conversations about Kickstart, I've actually worked with about 3 or 4 people who've taken on the Kickstart apprentice, and it's actually been quite successful.
Good. What do you think the key is to making it successful?
Well, I think it's choosing the right person, being clear what it is you're going to get the person to do. I mean, one particular accountant client of mine took somebody on to be a bookkeeper. And obviously he was a young fella, because you've got to be below 25. And she's just starting out, so she wanted a part-time bookkeeper to complement her services, and it's worked very well.
Yeah.
The other thing,
no friction in terms of the process of application, or
no, that all went through very easily. Yeah, much.
I suppose it's that thing, isn't it? People always shout louder about when it's gone wrong than when it's gone right.
Yeah, and there's another guy another lady who runs a hairdressing salon, so he's going to use that as an apprentice, and that's relatively straightforward. And if he's any good, or she's any good in this case, then they will get, they will transition to be a permanent apprentice, eventually a permanent employee.
Yeah, I think that's the kickstart in proper action, because the idea of the scheme is that they want, we want to encourage.
She's going to get training on the job, the lady.
Yeah, 100%.
The other interesting thing that perhaps Alex might want to comment on as well, furlough has ended, as we know. And I, and the common with other HR people I've been talking to, have not been inundated by requests for redundancy planning. There's apparently roughly a million people who are on furlough as of the end of September. And I don't know where they've all gone. They've either gone back to work, which begs the question, or they've disappeared, or there's been some, dare I say, false furlough applications. In other words, the company's been getting the money and the guys just don't exist.
I do wonder whether there's a lead time though, Michael. I wonder whether there's a lead time.
There might be a lead time.
Yeah.
What have you seen, Alex? Have you seen anything like that?
I haven't seen a massive uptick. So as you might say, wonder whether actually some of these people have simply just returned to work and or have been sort of paid off, or are necessarily not sure of their legal rights.
Yeah.
And it may well be a mixture of those. I did see a slight uptick in sort of June, July, August, kind of leading to sort of the end of the furlough when you say, look, actually, we clearly don't have a job for you in next month, let alone this month. And we'll go through that redundancy process now. And I saw a little uptick then. I'd be surprised if there is any substantial uptick now. I don't see sort of the floodgates still opening.
When's the reporting on furlough? Do they, because they must track the data?
Yeah, I think sometime around about now, I would think, for the last payment.
Yeah.
Right. So it's mainly furlough, a lot of Kickstart stuff. What else are you up to, Michael?
Oh, lots of other things. Yeah, normal stuff, updating contracts, no jab, no job. What can I do? What can I not do?
Yeah.
Going back to work with COVID-related situations, which is going to change again if Plan B comes in, obviously. Paying off a solicitor, Alex might like that. And dealing with shared parental leave, which is this most obscure policy that Mr. Clegg brought in. And somebody came along and wanted to use it, and he didn't understand it, and he got it wrong, and just sorting all that out.
Okay. All right, cheers. Thanks, Michael. We'll come back and talk about the case then in a minute. Alex, tell everybody who you are and what's going on in your life at the minute.
Afternoon, everyone. Alex Pearce from Penny Telford Solicitors, an employment lawyer, so act for both employees and employers, both sort of contentious and non-contentious matters. In terms of, I guess, the work that's on my desk at the moment, I suppose a bit like Michael's in terms of furlough, flexible working. I've had a few of those recently. I literally just got off the call, and apologies, I was sort of slightly late joining with a client who has just been dismissed together with her husband. The employer says by reason of redundancy. I think in reality she is disabled, and I think there's actually a fairly substantive disability discrimination claim that she may have, and a associated disability claim that her husband may have against their former employer. So I'm just about to take on that, and that should, I'd hope, settle fairly quickly. So I can't see there being any grounds for redundancy there. I'm also getting a couple of inquiries with regards to, I think, what Michael said about COVID vaccinations, number of sort of care home staff as well. My employer's going to terminate sort of, I think it's at the end of this month, isn't it, in terms of
November
the dates. And what can they do about it? And I think it's going to be a very hard argument to say that they have a substantive claim. I think a lot of people don't actually realise that even if you, so you're a hairdresser and you go into a care home, you also need to be vaccinated, not just those that work day in, day out.
If you're a
care home,
yes,
electrician, whatever it may be.
One of my clients is a funeral director, and they've confronted just that issue, and they have to go and recover somebody.
Yeah.
I'd imagine
it does.
Well, we'll cover that off in a little while, but yeah, I've got a question on that I'll save for now because I want to make sure we go around. But I'm curious about from a employment law and HR perspective. Hannah-Lee, how are you?
I am good, thank you.
Do you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody what's going on in your world?
Yeah, so I'm Hannah-Lee Palmer from Palmer Solicitors. I am a wills and probate solicitor, also dealing with things like powers of attorney. At the moment, I seem to be getting the weird and the wonderful clients coming through. The ones that are saying, oh, you know, dad passed away 15, 20 years ago, we need probate. And it's a case of, right, okay, do we have a will? Oh, we're not sure. And it's all of these sort of vague answers. And of course, with those comes the knock-on effect of potential inheritance tax. So with that particular one, we're hoping we're just under the threshold, but we're waiting on historic valuations to see. And it's just like,
well, where were that? What happened to the assets for 15 years, Hannah?
Well, what it is, a lot of the banks, if there's under a certain threshold and it's different per bank, they've just released the money on the basis that somebody's gone in with a death certificate. Whether or not they've given it to the right person, I don't know. And the house has just sat there. I think there was somebody who stayed in it temporarily and they've just, let it go. You'd be surprised the amount of people who just leave it. I've had another recent one. Her husband passed away about 7 years ago, and she's not paid the mortgage at all, and the property was in his sole name. And fortunately, the mortgage company are being absolutely brilliant. They're not trying to evict her or anything like that. But I think she's pushed it a little bit, just ignoring the letters that they've sent.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, it is weird, but we have conversations like this all the time. When something as traumatic as that happens to somebody, and the complexity and confusion, and hopefully people like us can help with that. The complexity and confusion of dealing with that sort of stuff is sometimes like that's the last thing in the world I want to do.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Chris, I've just personally gone through this.
Yeah, I know, Michael.
But I have to say the tell us once golf thing does work very well.
Yeah. So funny enough, we're supporting a couple of clients through probate arrangements at Cervello, and tell us once has been really useful.
And it doesn't cover everything.
No.
Well,
it's obviously just the government stuff.
Yeah, but
it's a good starting point.
It does, and it stops pensions being paid. It reduces the council tax and DVLA and God knows who else. But you've still got a right to the banks, insurance companies, and God knows who else as well.
Yeah.
And they all still want copies of the death certificate.
Yeah. It's not quick, is it?
No.
But yeah, how long typically you finding probate taken to issue, Hannah?
So we're still going. The guidance is still 8 to 12 weeks, but I had one come back within a week the other month. So I think
more simplistic or more complicated.
It was incredibly simple. So the guy had one property, one bank account, 3 beneficiaries, 2 executors. It was all very, very concise, under the tax threshold, not needing to claim any like additional allowances or reliefs or anything. So I think that's why. They've also updated their portal. So I think now you can upload a lot more things to the probate application. And I think that's streamlined a lot of it. But yeah, I think it's still one of those cases. If you've got one question mark or issue on your probate application, it goes to the bottom of that pile and gets forgotten about for months.
Yeah. The one we support the client with had residential nil rate ban we wanted to use, and BPR investments, and all of the more legitimate but more unconventional stuff. Oh yeah, I mean, part of the BPR investments was to get money out of the estate for that 2 years and mitigate IHT. So, but the HMRs, they want to check it all, don't they? So thankfully it's gone through and it's all fine. But yeah, no, those straightforward cases should be a little bit quicker, which is great. Right. So I've written my question down for Alex later, and I'll try and find a way to insert that as we go. Now, just one word of warning. I was on a meeting with a client the other day, and I've got in my new office. I've got a new 3-screen setup. So and I accidentally shared the wrong screen, which was a photo of my 2 girls. So if you do see Charlotte and Sophie, it's not intentional. It should be the case study, but if it does pop up, let me know. Right, what screen should I share? That's the one. Right, can everybody see the case study? Great. Okay.
Yes.
So And again, Russ reckons that this is the easiest 80s reference that I've ever used. So extra points for that. Rod and Jane are the second generation owners of Hayes Lighting, a business providing lighting to the film industry. That just, so, as you know, a lot of the references I use are based on real clients, and this is not a million miles away, with some elements added of a client we're doing some work with at the minute. The business was originally launched by Jane's dad, Jeffrey, in the early 80s, and building lighting, film and TV sets. Jane got involved in the business in the early 90s and has built it moving forward. Everything was fine until COVID hit and film production stopped. They had to use their capital reserves for a little while to weather the storm, but now they're busier than ever. The on-set team went back in January 2021, but they did put people on furlough during that period of time. Business employs a team of 23, including the 3 directors. Roger, Jane and Jeffrey are equal shareholders, but Rod isn't a shareholder, he's only a director. And Jane and Jeffrey, father and son, own the same share class, and wonder if that's actually sustainable as we move forward. Jeff is conscious that at the age of 73, he should have an exit plan. I'd be tempted to agree. But has always enjoyed his work and didn't feel ready to retire until now. But he is in pretty good health. Jane enjoys working with her dad, but really wants to get control of the business and start running it independently. And he's worried about the arrangement of shares. And Jane is wondering what fair transition for her dad looks like. So how do they make sure that Jane, takes over, but Dad's still looked after? All of the management team, particularly post-COVID, have had sort of people concerns. One particular example of that is Fred, who lived within a commutable distance to the majority of their work, but was furloughed and decided to move a lot further away, and doesn't want to move back. Jane agreed when the work started again to have Fred back, but is wondering whether that's sustainable and what she can do about it. Jane and Rod are also concerned about the impact of furlough on the team. Rod believes that more than Jane, because Jane's always felt that it's been a relatively remote business anyway, because people work on site and not together, but Rod doesn't believe that to be the case. Jane and Rod are also trying to persuade Jeff that they need to be investing a bit in the future, in particular energy efficient lighting, LEDs and the like. And Jane and Rod are trying to persuade George to join the business. George has got his own business, has opened a limited company and is considering setting up his own marketing agency. In terms of the new kit they want to invest in, they don't think they've done enough quickly enough. Rob believes that it's important for the longer term strategy, whereas Jane and Jeff don't see how it will reap dividends. I wonder if it's strategically worth it. And they've been looking at putting shareholder agreements in place and looking at the other elements they should do as business owners. As ever, let's start with, let me stop sharing my screen. We'll start with Janet. As I always say, all gaps are intentional, Janet. You know that. I do it just for you, just so you can take loads of notes. But what questions do you want to ask?
I think we've not got any numbers this time, so I think that was the biggest sort of gap for me. I think that'd be my first questions to ask. Let's have a look at some historical data, current data, and do some forecast data, and then we can start making a few decisions and give a few choices out. So think it'd be interesting to know what the capital sort of structure is going on, what are the reserves at the moment that are, you know, after the effect of COVID, you know, where do we actually sit with that now? You know, what is in terms of the share structure put together with the data, deciding, you know, we could do this, or we could issue some, or we could have different levels of shares, but without the data to support that, I think it's difficult to make sort of some good decisions on that. Forecasting forward, I think would be helpful, knowing, you know, about the investment in terms of, you know, do they go with the sort of the green choices or not? Yeah. I think, you know, that's the forecast has got to be part of that decision. It could be that actually it's not going to make, you know, a huge return, but without it, will the business sustain anyway? So I think it would, but again, I think the numbers have got to support the decision on that. Equally with the son George joining, I would sort of think about, you know, maybe, you know, what in terms of business plan has he got for his own business, and whether that could complement this business as opposed to just bringing him in. So again, I think, you know, always very difficult to do forecast with a new business. You know, there's a lot of guesswork that goes on with that, but he must have a plan in terms of, you know, why he set the company up, and what he sees in that. And I think, you know, he may struggle. I mean, this would be a personal opinion and not a professional one, but I think he might struggle coming into a company where he's, you know, maybe working within the constraints of his, you know, parents, as opposed to doing his own business and developing that. So the balance might be
that 2 generations as well.
Yeah, right? Yeah, I think it's a tough one. But you know, it potentially, you know, his parents' business could be his, you know, prime customer, and work on that basis, and build a business around that. But I think, you know, all them types of situations have to be supported by the figures, and you've got to work with that. So that would be my first sort of set to ask for all that sort of data.
2 questions then. What key indicators would you want? So if you had to pick like 4 or 5 numbers.
Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, I'd look on in terms of the investment. You've got to have a return on investment indicator and to work on that. Gross margins are always the main elements that we would work on. I think you could look at overall net profit indicators, but it's your gross margin which has got to be substantial enough to support, you know, the rest of your fixed costs. So we definitely be looking on them sort of percentages. I think liquidity is always a good one to look at, because, you know, if you're too highly geared one way, you know, you're going to struggle later on. So again, that's another one that I would, you know, be quite interesting to see. You know, if it's too highly financed, it dictates a lot of you know, options that you've got. So I think, yeah, it'd be, you know, gross margins, liquidity, you know, return on investments, are probably my main ones that I'm looking at.
And then I suppose the interesting thing about liquidity is, how do you judge that post the last 18 months we've had?
Yeah.
Particularly as people have taken bounce back loans.
Yeah. I think, you know, it's like, you know, the notes to accounts, you're always going to have notes to the accounts which explain why you've got them, you know, fluctuations and variances. So as long as you can understand the movements, then, you know, you've got to report it as it is, but with almost a disclaimer to say this is why it is what it is. Yeah. So you know, I think it's you know, we're going to see some odd numbers coming through almost, but understanding them and understanding the pressure that's putting on business is equally important, I think. Yeah.
I suppose the point I was making is not so much for the accounts, but more for the strategic projection forward. Sure. Because, you know, liquidity in, you know, if I use my, you know, the example client that is linked to this as an example, you know, they've had a great 2021.
Yeah.
2020 liquidity dropped a bit, and it's not, and then in previous years, actually, they've not grown as much.
Sure.
But so how do you square that circle in terms of?
I think I mean you can't change the numbers what they are, and I think that's the thing. It's a bit the scenario that I was just talking about before that I mentioned about with the fellow with the bounce back loan on his business. He's never borrowed before, so historically his numbers look his assets are very high in terms of those sort of numbers, and all of a sudden now he's got this lending that's been introduced.
Yeah.
So it does affect that flow of ratios, but you can't change that. It is what it is, and all you can do is explain that as to why it's there, and why it's changed, and how it will affect going forward, and so. Yeah, I don't think
he won't be alone, will he?
No, hugely not. No, because people took, and I think it's a good point. What I think it was Raymond said. That people took all these grants and loans and things, and there was never any indication that it was going to have an effect on their businesses later on, or their personal sort of lendability, if you like. So it's but everyone took them because we overly encouraged them to take them. 2.5% interest rate, don't pay back for a year. When are you ever going to get that sort of offer? Businesses clamoring for finance before they were issued, and then they were on the table, and in your bank the next day. But nobody said, oh well, actually be careful because this might affect your situation in a year's time, and so there will be a lot of people in that position, definitely. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions?
Any other questions? No, I think there's quite a lot of sort of HR stuff there, because in terms of what packages for employees and how to manage that, I think that all needs to be answered or presented in terms of sort of what HR would recommend on that. I think you definitely want to know what individuals wanted, what do the individuals want, and then we can try and put a plan together around that, or present the options around that, because potentially is a little bit vague as far as what do people want, what does George want, what does the dad want, would he like a regular income, or would he like a pay amount, one lump sum pay amount. And I think again that's going to work in conjunction with your financial advisor to give that planning, and then with our numbers as far as what's reserves in the company, then we can think about what to do. So I think it involves quite a lot of other sort of professionals to have that input on it. Yeah,
well, I mean, what does financial independence look like for Jeff? We don't know, do we?
Yeah, no, exactly right.
What would it take for him to live the life he wanted? But I suppose the other thing is that emotional involvement as well, right? Not this particular client, but we've had another client where business owner was running it, son and daughter was involved as well, and then he used to pop in every day, and it's I suppose it's that journey from being able to let go, if that's the right thing to do for him.
Yeah, no, hugely. Funnily, I had a client in yesterday, and he was here quite late. He's got an engineering business, and he's literally said, "I'm not retiring." So he's got his sons working in there. He said, "I've already told them I'm not retiring." So he said, "I'll work a few less hours," but he said, "I love it." He said, "It's not hard work for me to go to work. It's what I love doing." And so, you can't argue with that. If that that's how he feels. That's just...
at least he was upfront about it. I've had a client where it's a lot more murky, and it becomes a family conflict. He said he was going to go, but he hasn't gone. The conversation.
The half of the problem is, Michael, communication, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Having that clarity, and from our perspective, plans are great, and then things change. Is he always going to feel that way about that business? And getting him to a point financially where it doesn't matter. He's got a choice. He chooses whether to work or not. And if he still wants to carry on, great. But that independence is really important. Raymond, so hi Yvonne, how are you?
Hello. Sorry, I'm so late. I really wanted to come. I've been so busy. It's just been crazy. But yeah,
no worries. Great to see you. We'll get round to once we've
sure.
answered the first question. Thanks for coming along. Raymond, talk to me about what questions you've got. Oh, this is perfect for you, though, isn't it? I couldn't throw in any more family members if I tried.
No. And I'm trying to think of a joke or something with rainbow in it, but I can't. And I'm struggling really desperately just to find a way to get it in there.
Oh, you made the right bungle of that pun.
Oh, you found a way to get bungle in it, which I thought was really good. So let me just, before we go to the family bit, just a little bit follow up with what Janet was saying around the finances. So I got all one of the things I put here, and I completely agree, the gross margin is the absolute key number. And one of the things I put here was about getting clear understanding of drivers and decision making. Because if you want to get into the ROI of whether or not to buy the new equipment, that is to truly understand the outcome and the mindset, because you can see there's a real difference between the three of them, or sorry, 2 versus 1, which is an interesting dynamic. And also when you talk about the cash flow, I think one of the things when talking about KPIs is to have an idea of what good look, as you talk about financial independence as individuals, but from a business perspective, what does good look like now in terms of liquidity, but also what is the plan to get. So if you actually wanted, if they needed to go and get funding to be able to get that out the business, as a funder, you'd be looking for, okay, you might have a month's worth of cash coverage today, but on the basis these dynamics change and it's the margin that is improving, we can actually see how the cash grows. So I think it's about getting some key bits there. But for me, the main things I looked at were, my God, what a husband and wife team we have here, where you have a husband who doesn't have any stake in the business, a wife who talks to her dad without a husband about what to do about the ownership of the business. And they want to bring the son in as well. I said, I wonder which one of them will talk to the son, because if they're not talking to each other, just understanding what the shareholding was. And maybe the shareholding doesn't need to change without their understanding of what their own financial impact is and whether they may have other investments and whose name they're in, so that their whole take home as a family, what does that look like? Actually, the shareholding might be okay. And actually, from a family perspective, from the parents' perspective, is just because is to get an understanding of who owns the shares and who actually, and he may well be the one who owns the business in the sense that he runs it, but actually how the difference between shareholding and management and actual ownership in terms of day to day. So I was just kind of like,
and again, this is why Inner Circle is great in terms of looking at other perspectives. But in my head, I'd want to be looking at potentially utilising an equal, and again, let's take Dad out. Let's assume Dad's gone and husband and wife continue to run the business. From a financial planning and tax perspective, I want to make use of the allowances and both their tax rates. Now, I'm not saying that's right for the actual running of the business. So surely a shareholding for him, if you were looking at it from that perspective, would be right, because you'd get to use his personal allowance and his basic rate band and all of that sort of good stuff. Right. And his entrepreneur's relief if they ever eventually sell.
Right. But then we get into the conversation about a share, we get into alphabet shares here, can't we? Around just, I think one of the things that when you talk about the emotions of this conversation is to recognize why things are done with shares versus how the business actually operates between the pair of them. Because what you could get into so a lot of male business owners get into this, the flip side of this is we don't want to give any of our shares away because we own the business. And if you actually say to the wife, there is no business if he's not working anyway, right? It's kind of a moot point.
No, that's fair.
Yeah. And in the same conversation here, there's no clarity of roles. So you don't know, he may be the salesman in this business, and without him going out and winning business and there may not be much of a business left. So I think it's important to get clarity of roles and why shareholding is set up in the way it is in relation to the relationship that they have and their own objectives. Because if giving Jane 75% of the shares optimizes everything because that gives them what they want, there is a very high emotional element to a male business owner in that context, in the sense that that is not how many men think. And you can see that that's what he's thinking. I'm an owner, but I don't own any shares. So that all the messaging from him is, what does this mean and where am I going? Whereas his wife is like, well, actually, obviously doesn't seem to matter too much, in the sense that what's good for us and how do we make this work? So it's the dynamic of what practically happens with shares and roles versus how you make that work to give them what they actually want in life. So when you talk about it from a financial planning perspective, it's the same thing around ownership and everything else and dynamic of roles. It's not about, because we're quick to label.
Can I ask a question? If they did give in some shares and then they decided to get divorced, what effect would that have on the company?
Well, they'd have to buy them back, wouldn't they?
So that might be one of the reasons why they haven't given them any shares up to now.
Yes.
I mean, that could be a reason, but I mean, I suppose that it's, we've got a couple of lawyers on the call. That'd be then goes, and we haven't got a divorce lawyer on the call. We have had before, but I suppose that'd have to be negotiated as part of the divorce proceedings, wouldn't it?
Yes, I'd like to say.
Do the value of the shares then get sort of transferred back, or what do you do on that? But I'm with you, Raymond. The ownership of the shares is a different debate to the management of the firm. It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and just understanding that. For me, I just very similar to Janet. What does good look like for Jeffrey exiting? How much does he need? When does he need? Give me 73. What does he have right now? Because that's not, for none of these is it clear what their current financial circumstances are. So whether the business has or does not have cash, do any of these guys have other assets? On the ROI, I was kind of like, I'm really, there's I think one of the things which you need to get to the bottom of is the way they actually think and the way they make decisions, because you're seeing this, well, we're not sure if this will work. And that strikes me as a bit of a gut reaction, where a husband's kind of like, well, no, it strikes me as is a little bit more.
I mean, part of that might be time frames of perception of success, right? So Jeff might be saying, well, I'm 73 and I need this to work for another 10 years. Whereas hubby might be turning around and thinking, well, look, that's fine, but I need it to work for another 30.
Yeah.
That might be one of the reasons. But yeah. Anything else? Any other questions?
No, that's it.
Cool. I'm really excited about coming back for the solution round. But I think the initial thing might be getting them in a room and bang their heads together. Is that the first thing we're going to suggest? Sarah, talk to me about more questions you had.
Excuse me for about 10 minutes. I'll be back in 10 minutes.
No worries. We'll come back round.
I hope you appreciated the effort I went to do my background. I've learned a whole new thing. I was listening.
You know what? We should do that. You've got to do a visual representation of the reference. Love it. Love it.
I've added to dynamic, Chris, if nothing else, because I'm not sure I've got too much else to add right now. I was particularly drawn to George only because I have a daughter who's 22 who's setting up her own marketing company. So that was all very so that was all good. And what I thought actually was, obviously they came a bit of a cropper during COVID, and just whether they've had any conversations about future COVID resilience and whether there's any diversification that they could think about, particularly around the lighting and the energy efficiency and more domestic usage. And, is there anything they could do that might give them an income stream to bolster them in future? And obviously George could be there to market all of that lovely stuff. And as Janet say, it could be his number one client. I did just have a question. I know they're thinking about whether they need the office for staff or not, and very much into let's ask the staff what works for them, and doing that kind of HR survey before any decisions are made. But actually, with all of the lighting and rigs that they've got, you know, where is it stored at the moment? What do they need for that? What are they going to need going forward? Will going energy efficient, if that's the route they go, make any difference? So that was number 2 that I had that was an addition. No, I think everything else I had was pretty much covered.
Cool. And I do appreciate the background. That is amazing. That is amazing. Alex, tell me what questions you've got, mate.
I think I probably mention this every time that we do this. I think I'd want to know whether there's sort of contracts of employment in place. I think just really building blocks. So contracts for the employees, or the directors' service agreements for directors. I mean, is there a shareholders agreement? I mean, these are sort of the key documents I think any lawyer would probably want to have a look at right from the start. And I think moving on to obviously Fred. So Fred is now sort of living up north. There appears to be some kind of an agreement as to that move. I mean, was that a temporary agreement? Was that to be reviewed in 6-12 months? Was it a permanent move? Is there anything in writing with regard to that? Because I think they're going to have some tough time getting Fred to get back to work if they said, well, you can move up north and you can work remotely. It's a contractual change. So I certainly want to know sort of that information.
If Jane was in a position where she agreed that Fred could do that, but didn't confirm that it was a temporary change, is that implied permanency? Is that like sort of?
I think depending on how long the arrangement has lasted, then yes, I think Fred could say, well, actually, look, there's by virtue of the conduct, by allowing me to do X, Y, and Z over this length of time, there's now contractual rights.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly easier for, I guess, Fred or Jane, depending on which one you're acting for, if there is something in writing. Otherwise, you get into the situation where we had a meeting on X date, we discussed A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Jane thinks something's happening and Fred thinks something completely different. And then 6 months later, there's a massive falling out and Jane's forcing Fred back.
I suppose the element is if there's no agreement of how permanent or temporary the arrangement is, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. It's a bit like whether it's, like, say, moving up north or working from home. It's always a good idea to get these matters agreed in writing, and certainly having a trial period, because you never know whether it's going to work or not. I mean, certainly if Fred is a lead lighting technician, I mean, that sounds like a pretty hands-on job. It also depends, I say, whether they are willing to, I guess, meet Fred's accommodation and travel costs.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of negotiation to be had, or do they want to take a hard line?
Yeah, yeah. Is there what's the standpoint on the fact that he did go and move during being furloughed? Is there a particular perspective on that?
I think nothing that prevents an individual moving whilst furloughed.
Yeah.
Certainly nothing in the rules that I'm aware of. And I guess it depends, can he do his job from home?
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, Alex?
I think they were probably sort of the key questions that I had for the time being. I'm going to have to shoot off just before 2:30, so apologies if I suddenly disappear.
No worries. All right. Great to see you. Thanks, Alex. Hannah Lee, questions?
A lot of mine have kind of been covered off, but first thing's going to be that articles. You're going to need to know who exactly, well, we know the shareholders, but who is actually a director? Because although they're referring to themselves as being owners, to me, it kind of suggests Jeffrey could still be a director. If he is, how are the directors to make decisions? For instance, if they need a unanimous decision for certain elements, have they got things like powers of attorney in place? Should one of them be unable to make a decision?
Yeah.
Again, what are their individual aims? If Jeffrey wants to just move away from the business but still wants to be receiving the dividends from his shareholdings, it's just stepping down as a director, which is very different to being bought out and having the capital in his bank account.
Yeah.
And with that, it might depend on his own personal finances. You know, if it's leaving the capital in the business, it might be better off for IHT purposes or something. If he's going to have some involvement going forwards. The other thing would probably be, do they have wills? So if they did absolutely nothing, Jeffrey's shares, has he got a will that leaves it between all of his children if he has other children? And then you're going to have the potential for Rod and Jane to have to buy out additional people. You know, if Jane's got a few siblings, we want our money rather than having an interest in the business.
That's a completely fair point. You know, if the will says, you know, my assets are equally shared with all of the kids, as opposed to specifying specifically that the shares are going back to Jane or Rod, then that's going to make it messy potentially, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So some of them might be quite happy to have an interest in the business, but Rod and Jane might not want that. And then it goes back to that whole, how much is the business worth? How much are you going to pay out? Who you're going to give what to, etc. Yeah, I think that pretty much, like I said, a lot of mine were already covered off by others.
Yeah. I think the general theme that's emerging is, you know, business owner hat and shareholder hat should be two separate things, and you need to make sure they're defined pretty clearly. So we can talk a little bit in a bit more depth about that.
Yeah.
Yvonne, how are you? Tell everybody who you are, and we'll start with that.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm an HR consultant. I work with small, i.e. companies generally that have upwards of 20 employees and less than 160 employees, and typically they don't have any in-house HR expertise. So they retain me to give advice on matters to do with HR. Sometimes things become contentious and litigious, and I then have to get lawyers involved. But yeah, that doesn't happen if they follow good advice. Doesn't happen too often. So yeah, that's me. You probably sent on email the case study, right? Which I have to confess, I've not had a chance to look at, but I did, you know, pick up, you know, some of the points in the conversation. And I last year actually was advising an individual who used to be a shareholder and a director in a fairly good sized organization, and things became incredibly murky when they wanted to exit her from the business. There was a complete breakdown in communication, and the documents, clearly you know, they just done like a DIY on their shareholders agreement and some other documents, and they weren't fit for purpose in terms of giving clarity on you know, who could vote at what meetings, what was a quorum, etc. So it was so messy that you know, I can really resonate with the importance of having properly drawn up documents in place, because they will help to clarify, you know, the direction that we need to move in if we are to disentangle a relationship that has been working fairly okay for a decade. Yeah. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to say that.
What factors do you think are really important to include in that shareholders agreement and you know, the articles of association with the business?
Yeah, well, I think so. In the case that I was involved in, the shareholders agreement actually didn't clearly specify how I mean, I'm not an expert on shareholders agreement, but it didn't even specify what, how the shares were distributed sort of proportionally. So, one director had 30%, another had 10%. And it was just so messy that, it didn't help them at all in that scenario. Both parties who were in conflict could interpret it in a way that suited their particular
there was too much ambiguity, right?
Yeah, and what they wanted to get out of that situation. So they need to have a shareholders agreement that is properly constituted by a legal professional. There needs to be discussion around the draft to make sure that the document reflects the understanding and the intention of the parties, not something cribbed from somewhere with clauses that actually made no sense and did not fit the needs of the shareholders. Those shareholders were also directors, and also had officer positions within the business. So it was really an unholy disaster, and it's actually in court now, costing so much money to even get the shareholder part sorted out. What shares do I own? Do I have a right to demand that I'm paid the value of the shares when the business is still going? It is really a messy scenario. So yeah.
Thank you. So we'll talk about what we do. I know this is your first summit in a circle. So
no, it's not my first time in a circle.
Oh, have you done?
I've
been before.
Well, I've been not on this is my first time on the remote one, but I've been.
You have been to a live one.
Of course I have. I've been to more than one live one.
You know what? It's been so long.
It's been so
I've
long.
done a live in the circle. It's been 2 years. So thank you for coming on.
That's okay.
I appreciate it. I forgot. I think I'm suffering some sort of like pre-COVID memory loss. That I don't remember what happened after we didn't communicate like this. But lovely to see you. Okay. Janet, save me now from really embarrassing myself and not remembering that I've attended a live in a circle. I know you've been a few times.
Definitely. Very nice lunch as well, I've got to say, Chris.
Thank you.
I
didn't do it myself. Talk to me about action. So we've got these diverse business, range of different issues and challenges. What do we need to do?
I think, just sort of pick up on what Yvonne was just saying about the shareholder agreements, and that's actually a real challenge to get businesses to do that. I think they come to me with something they've printed off for the internet, registering their company, and not thinking about all them other issues, and I think it's a very short term sort of view in that, well, what's that going to cost? We don't need that. That's we don't need to have that in place. And equally, it's like registering your company. You just take them standard articles and memorandums, and then they're quite often not appropriate for the business that you've got.
But then, certainly we have conversations in our business about, how much do you spend head down, actually getting the work done, and head up, looking at what the future looks like. And I think we're probably sometimes guilty of not doing enough head up stuff, aren't we? And so
100%, 100%. Yeah, people seem no value in it, no return, no value. So why are they going to spend money on that? And so it's as particularly in them early days. And I think that's the problem. What resources you've got in them early days. You're using them maybe to build your business, and you don't want to spend it on the other stuff all around it. But it should be addressed, and but it's a challenge. Yeah, definitely a challenge to get companies to.
Do you reckon businesses get to a certain level of maturity and think we now need to get organised?
Yeah, I think you do get a lot of that, but I think the other side of that is, most businesses start off, if it's not a sole director, then you've got two or three friends, and it sort of builds on that basis, and none of them think ahead and think, we might not be friends forever, and quite often they're not. So that's the problem, you know, trying to get them agreements in place just in case you're not friends anymore is a difficult thing for them to sort of think about and comprehend.
I'll let you bring up that conversation.
It's a challenge.
So okay, talk to me about action.
Yeah, okay, so what, you know, once we've got all our numbers, you know, I'm hoping they're going to be on something like 0, and then we can, you know, populate them numbers quite easily. But again, you know, that would be a challenge in itself, if really depending on what the business records are like, as to how easy those numbers are to sort of generate, and the time frame on that. So all being well, it will be a nice little cloud-based system, and we've got our numbers, and then we can start producing them reports and giving them scenarios, and thinking about the decisions that can be made on top of them. I think it's not always going to be what's going to be the best, necessarily the best financial outcome sometimes, because it's, you know, you've got to take other considerations into account as well. But at least I think it's making them informed choices based on the numbers that you've got, and so that would be us going forward, and then setting out the different scenarios that could be achieved, you know, whether it be you know, paying off dad with a lump sum, you know, what would happen in that situation, whether it being giving him a regular you know, dividend amount to sort of stay, you know, as an exec on the board, or bringing the son in, or not making the investment decisions, or not, you know, the HR package for the additional of an employee working remotely, or not. So I think it would be all them sort of decisions to make based on whatever the numbers sort of populate out on.
So two elements spring to mind immediately. I mean, I'd assume they're a firm of, you know, if they're employing, you know, 20 plus, their probably turnover size is going to mean that they should be digital already, right?
You would hope.
3D.
Not always the case, you know, definitely not always the case. And even then, I mean, I reviewed some digital records for somebody recently who had over £1 million turnover, and the records were rubbish constantly. They didn't use anybody and it was literally, you know, they were just rubbish. You know, the whole balance sheet was not not reflecting.
Is that a technical account?
Yeah, definitely. You've not heard that.
They're just rubbish.
Literally, I mean, just the whole sort of categorization meant that you know, the balance sheet didn't reflect what it should do. So, you know, you really are struggling then because the numbers not going to mean anything, you know, so you've then got to make a decision, well, do we redo the whole accounting sort of function on this, you know, and in what way? Because, so, yeah, I think that's it. You know, people just assume that you're going to be able to put them together, and it doesn't work like that, you know.
Why wouldn't a company of this size be?
It's a straight, again, it's the value. People don't see the value in having that, doing that. I mean, I've in the process at the moment of redoing some company accounts. They've asked me to do them, but when I've looked at them, they did the previous year in-house, and they've literally just made up the numbers. So now I've got to go back and do that. Yeah, I sort of cannot pick up from them numbers. No. They literally mean nothing. So I'm going to have to resubmit to Companies House on the previous year and do the company. So within a very tight frame.
Could be a few implications to that as well.
Yeah. The whole tax calculation's wrong. Everything is
your
incorrect.
bill reflects them.
I mean, actually, no, I had to go back and say, look, you know, if you want me to do this way, it is, you know, there's more time on this now. I can't do it, and so it is your call. But yeah, she's sort of saying, well, can't we just draw a line? Like, it doesn't work like that. Like, no. Yeah, so I think it's a big challenge.
And you wouldn't. I mean, speaking from a like professional perspective, you don't want the liability, do you? You know what I mean?
No.
You just, you know, I wouldn't be prepared to sort of validate that.
No, yeah. To be honest, in hindsight, I wish I'd said no, because, you know, it's just a whole, you know, and it's not pleasurable work, is it? Unpicking, you know, rubbish stuff, you know, it's not pleasurable. No.
This is the weird thing, right? I think, and again, this is speaking not as a financial planner but as a business owner. And Sarah and I have already had this conversation this week, funny enough. Not only a business owner, but a bit of a geek. I love a zero report.
Yeah,
I love a zero report.
Oh my word!
They're really good.
100%, 100%. You know, this. I've got to say, there is so much stuff in there that's underutilized.
Yeah, you know what? The profit and loss zero report is just like from a strategic perspective moving forward is a really useful. Yeah, a lot of stuff in zero is just sort of underutilized. I don't do any of the bookkeeping stuff, but the strategic stuff I really enjoy.
Yeah.
I need to get a life, Janet.
I know. But
I get excited about zero.
Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? I mean, there's like, you know, some analytic stuff going on there, which is absolutely fascinating. I've got to say.
I see a Facebook fan group popping up.
I think you're right.
I love zero.
I know. I've got to say, you know, we've got this showcase coming up, and our new banner is actually a zero banner.
Is it?
I love it. I'm not so keen on the colouring. It doesn't really sort of complement our colours very well, but I'm going to have to live with it. Yeah, it's blue. Yeah, it's not really.
Yeah.
But you know, some things you just got to live with, haven't you? So.
I look forward to seeing that banner. This is just I don't know where this is going to go. Raymond, save me again.
So sorry.
From the when Janet and I will set up a little I Love Zero fan club at some point. But on that note, what action, apart from just banning me and Janet from any inner circle ever again, would you take with Rod, Jane, and the gang?
Well, as a finance man who gets bored talking about zero, so, oh my God, they have the opportunity here to put all the foundations in of a great family business that can grow.
Right, hold on. I love that. I love that. Can I just say one thing about zero, and then I'm going to shut up, right? Zero for me isn't about the numbers. It's about the story it tells me about my business.
Yes.
It's not about the numbers. It's about understanding where we're going. And I think a lot of business owners we speak to and say, look, as part of your strategic financial plan, we should look at what your business is doing. I'm not keen on that. No, don't worry about the numbers. Worry about what it's telling you in terms of where your business is going and how that applies to your life. Zero ran over. I expect to check from zero in the morning. Carry on.
Just remember that zero gives you outputs. It's the decision making and the inputs that are key.
100%.
And that's where these guys are. They have the opportunity, starting with them as the husband and wife, the father and the son, to actually get clarity as a starting point for what each of them wants and how as a collective that comes together. That's the bit that will be missing in most conversations. Well, I sat down and worked out for us what's important. Hold on a minute, each individually come together and actually as a collective for the family work out the dynamics of what this business is going to be able to do for all of them. So when Janet was saying about what the dad wants, what Jeffrey wants moving forwards and how he can want moving forwards, this is an economic engine that has the ability, potentially, depending on what the numbers say, to deliver on the outcomes for each of them. So clarity of what each of them wants. And then the conversation we've had, Chris, about what's your number and by when, because they all will have different numbers for different timeframes, and aligning those numbers and timeframes together so you have one plan as a family of what they are looking to achieve.
Yeah.
And without any, and forgetting, just bring the business to this conversation in a way that aids the conversation rather than starting with the business. They have an opportunity then to actually be clear about, they get the structure sorted out around understanding their numbers, their shareholding, get someone like yourself in, Chris, or someone who's got experience on getting the dynamics right between shareholding, ownership, and connecting it to what they actually want. And then aligning their roles in the business, which then comes back to Jeffrey in particular, as in, if you want this amount of money, and this is what you're going to do. Just being clear and happy.
Sorry, I'm going to have to disappear because there's a man delivering a new dishwasher and it's only me in the house.
All right, Michael. No worries.
And also then can engage George, because you can understand what he's actually looking for. And if he, and I think, I can't remember if it was Janet or who said that if he's got maybe the best thing for him might be to be a client of the business or a supplier to the business, which would be just, but that whole dynamics, decision-making, so that when you go for the financials, you understand what but the decision-making that leads to those numbers and where that needs to change, because the decision-making in here seems confusing, as in whether Jane actually does talk to Rod about the business or whether she just talks to her dad. And then build the business for its core dynamics and the building. And it's all about excuse me if I start talking about Lego. It's all about Lego bricks and building blocks to deliver a business. So,
great. I've got a bunch of questions that I will come to, but I'm conscious Alex needs to leave at 2:30. So Alex, what action are you going to be taking with this business?
And I think, first of all, I'd want to know what the business objective is with Fred. Are they looking to come to some kind of sort of resolution with him, or are they going to be taking a hard line? It's not working. You're not willing to be flexible. We're going to terminate your employment and we'll simply deal with the fallout. Even if that meant, for example, a claim for unfair dismissal, you could take a really hard line on it.
Okay,
not that I would necessarily advise that, but you could.
So you're sitting, and that's the interesting thing, isn't it? You're sitting with that employer. Are you recommending they're going down that road?
I mean,
No.
I would certainly. I mean, it's an option, certainly. It may well end up in an unfair dismissal
that's
claim,
the
but depending on
nuclear.
what.
That's the nuclear option.
It's a nuclear option. It's an option which I think actually a lot of employers are worried and rightly worried to take, but sometimes that is the only option. I wouldn't necessarily it's the only option here, because I think actually there's probably some negotiation to be done between the parties, and there's likely to be a resolution. Obviously, Fred is a valued member of the team. They probably don't want to lose Fred, but I think all options should be on the table, certainly when discussing it with the client. Much will depend on whether that the move was a temporary move or not, and whether the business is willing to obviously make some exceptions in terms of paying accommodation costs, travel costs, because when you start doing it with one employee, that seems to open the floodgates to
president,
all other employees. And is the business prepared to do that? And so I wouldn't necessarily advise them to dismiss him and deal with the fallout, but it is an option, and sometimes that nuclear option is something that needs to be deployed.
I suppose the interesting thing is understanding that it's not in the case study, but understanding where the issue might be and why the flexible working arrangements that Fred's got don't work for the business, because we don't know, do we? So is it travel costs, and is that a conversation that they can have have a sort of negotiation on, or is it is there a way that they can potentially work together?
Yeah, because obviously he talks about Fred moving because his mum was unwell. Is she still unwell, for example? Yeah. What was that discussion? Okay, look, yes, you're on furlough, move wherever you like, obviously you're not working, but yes, we expect you back upon return to the office. If that's the case, then they can insist that he returns on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, and if he fails to do so, then you can go down sort of a disciplinary route potentially. But I think ultimately it's really what the business wants to achieve, and then moulding that advice around that.
I suppose the challenge that this business has got is that Jane's made the decision, temporarily or otherwise, to bring him back under certain conditions.
Yes, and I think sometimes when you're in sort of that moment, you need to sort of take a step back look at sort of the bigger picture, and okay, what is this looking? What's going to look like for the business going forward? So ultimately, you don't think, okay, this may not work. Okay, this is now a temporary arrangement.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, has Fred made a flexible working application?
Yeah.
Was this a formal response, or was this just a verbal agreement? It does throw up some really interesting points.
Amazing stuff. Thanks, Alex. Have a good remainder of the day.
Thank you very much.
Catch up with you on Inner Circle soon. See you
Take
later.
care. Thanks so much. Bye.
Raymond, coming back to you. I've got a few extra questions. Where would you start? Would you start with the roles within the business or the shareholding?
No, I think you have to get the shell. I think it's the shell out of the way. I think that's likely to be more contentious from my experience. So get it out of the way. Get some frame, because if you've got to position it right for why the shareholding is the way it is, for what they want, and then you can address. Then you can come down and into the business and through the roles and everything.
Do you think that needs independent mediation? Do you think that you need somebody coming in saying, "Look, you like," because the relationships then muddy the waters a bit, don't they?
I think yes. The answer to your question is yes, and I think what you need is almost it needs to be kind of completely almost a blank sheet of paper, because there's no it just needs to be right just needs to be right, as in the best way to move forwards, rather than and be someone who can actually handle it. There will be a lot of emotion in it, which is why I think when you start thinking about it in positioning it in the context of, if you want to achieve this is the most practical way for you to achieve it. It takes the emotion. You can have the emotional but if you do it differently, then there are implications on what you want to achieve. So if you get them bought into that piece first and then structure the dynamics to achieve it, it's a bit like having a business. Half the challenges of having a business and talking to your family is that we think about it from the business perspective. I'm doing this because I want it for us, when actually what we think us wants and what we actually want may not necessarily be the same thing. So if you start if you put the horse before the cart, you'll actually take a lot of the emotion and challenge out of the positioning on a lot of things. Doesn't mean it won't still be, the raincoat's got too short of sleeves on it, I'm not sure I feel comfortable wearing it, but fundamentally it's not the same conversation as, well, what you're doing is you're telling me, as the owner of this business, I no longer own it.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, thank you, mate. Really appreciate that. Sarah, tell us a little bit about what you'd recommend in terms of action.
Okay, well, totally out of the remit of Better with Money, it would be just to get that communication in place. Get all of the foundations of the business, but just sit down and talk to each other, talk to the employees. And I think maybe some one-on-one, and this probably is in the Better with Money thing, with George, just to have a chat with him about his vision for his life, and maybe the differences between being an employee and self-employed, and how that might impact on him, and the sorts of things he might want to think about when setting up a business in terms of
what's
cash flow. And
so we've had, and again, they won't become clients, but we're gonna do sort of an hour free with them anyway. A couple of introductions from accountants over the past couple of weeks with young guys who've built really successful online marketplace businesses during lockdown, and they're at the start of that financial independence journey, but actually they've had a really good start because they've been quite entrepreneurial and built decent businesses, but and have recognised working with their accountant that they've got a really big opportunity, right, to start at that point and then start to build that wealth.
Yeah, and I think, and the reason I say this is because we've got a client who is a benevolent fund, and so they provide financial education for all of their members. But of course, their members could be in all different workplaces and companies. And they identified that a lot of people were setting up their own businesses during COVID.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, particularly those that had been furloughed and then decided to make a life change or had been made redundant and didn't want to just go back to the same career. And they have asked us to put together a course to just give people the basics around what to think about when you're setting up a business, not necessarily how to be uber successful, but just about getting the foundations right,
getting the basics
and
right.
business plan. You know, I mean, the best bit of advice anyone ever gave me when I took on Better with Money was, whatever you do, the moment you get any income, put 20% in a pot for VAT and 20% in a pot for tax and leave it, you know, and then at least you know you're covered. Because I think the guys that told me that had set up a business and hadn't done it, got to the end of year one and then were like, oh my God. No, and it's just all these tiny little things that are just really easy to tell people and that can make a massive, massive difference. So, I'd love to get my hands on George.
So I don't know if I've ever...
Not in that way.
Snippy was my favourite, but whatever floats your boat. But the... I'm not even going there. You know what? What's funny, I don't know if I've ever told you this. We do it at home. We do it on like our personal finances, but we also do it at work. We name our contingency fund, and we put a bit more than 20% away, but we name our contingency fund the Squirrel. And the reason we name it the Squirrel is just because it's the money that we just don't touch and leave there for. And it's, if anybody wandered into our office when we were having a financial meeting with Nick, Cassie and I, and we're talking about, so how much is in the Squirrel at the moment? And it's almost as I like to get my hands on George. But actually that habit of just saying, we've got plenty of, I mean, as an FCA regulated business, you know, we're under a requirement to have a capital adequacy amount anyway, and actually we hold that in a separate pot. But the Squirrel is all about making sure that, you know tax bills paid, everything is covered, so we know we're going to be okay. So yeah, very sensible piece of advice.
Exactly. And just to add to that, because obviously there's George, but it would be Jeff, because as we know, people that have had their own businesses and worked really hard, and even if they've been employees, to make that transition to retirement is not only a financial transition, but a really emotional one as well. And really thinking about what they're going to do with their time and the elements of work that actually they want to take forward into retirement, like the challenge, the routine, the socializing. So actually coming on the Retirement Insight course and hearing somebody that's been through that and understanding what kind of that emotional transition might be helpful for Jeff as well before he works on his exit plan and decides what he's going to do.
You know, I mean, we talk a lot about this with our clients. There was a book that I read recently that gave me a really interesting insight into this by a guy called Paul Dolan, who's the head of behavioural economics at the London School of Economics. There was still economics in there, and it really confused me. But he talks about happiness and how we can sort of analyse what happiness means. And he says that he talks about the fact that, hedonistic pleasure in and of itself isn't enough for most people. It should be about both pleasure and purpose. And a lot of the clients that we work with who are approaching that period where work might be optional and they might be choosing to give up work, a lot of the conversations we have is that you've got time to do all the pleasurable stuff, but what do we replace with work that still continues to give you purpose? And I don't think that's an easy answer, Sarah.
No,
you've got to plan it. You can't just say, yeah, there we are, got to go to the park every day. You can't do that in the winter.
No. And actually, the amount of clients, Michael, where work just carries on, number one, because people enjoy it, but they've got more choice over what they do, or there's a bit more of a sort of glide down, is probably the majority of my clients now. Retirement in its conventional sense, I don't think exists for a lot of people anymore, not particularly for my clients, but
one of the things we talk about with people is about using something they really enjoy doing and seeing if you can get paid for it. So, an example of that might be somebody who's retired who absolutely loves gardening. And there are so many people out there that need help with their gardening. So actually, you know, you go from a career doing what you want, where suddenly you can mow somebody's lawn 3 times a month, get paid for it, really love doing it, probably give somebody who needs the company. And so it gives you that purpose and doing something you love.
Yeah.
Or if the other thing you can do, provided you can afford it, is taking a lot of voluntary work. I mean, Yvonne and I, both being HR people, can go and work for the Citizens Advice Bureau. For everyone who comes in and says, I've been made redundant, what can I do? What are my rights? And all the rest of it. That can be very rewarding.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things you can do. You can do NED work, can't you? And non-executive directorship work. You know, there's loads that you can do. Interestingly, that that desire to spend more time outside has been a bit of a recurring theme in my clients, Sarah. You know, academics, funny enough, teachers who have or university lecturers who said, I'd actually rather spend more time in outdoors and doing manual work. So it's interesting.
Yeah. So complete change. And can I be really geeky? This is on Pension Geek. So my favourite ever pensions minister, Sir Steve Webb, who did bring in the new state pension rules. I was lucky enough to be chatting with him the other day, and he totally went up in my estimation, because now what he does, I mean, he does do some part-time work anyway in financial services, but he's become a debt counsellor for one of the major debt charities. And I just think, brilliant. How amazing is that? You know, back to your point, Michael. I
spoke at an event with Steve Webb, and he was a lovely guy, really nice guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good. Michael, talk to me about Action. What are you telling these people to do?
Well, first of all, I think they should do a survey of their staff to see what the staff want, because they're talking, you know, Rod wants to relocate, Jane doesn't want to relocate. What are the staff, if they're worrying about their staff, what do their staff want? So the first thing I would do would be a survey.
Ask.
Sorry? Ask. Exactly. You know, use Survey Monkey or something like that. They're quite. And then act on the results of that. I'm not sure why everyone want. And in terms of building up staff morale, they might want to introduce some kind of employee benefits package, cycle to work, which is green, or help people with childcare vouchers, all things that don't necessarily cost lots of money, but do a lot for improving staff morale and staff retention. And I'm sure Janet could advise them, the accountants, you know, the tax benefits of doing stuff like that. And possibly even decide to increase their contribution towards the staff pension. So that would do a lot for staff retention, staff morale. I don't know if you came up with an answer with a flexible working request, because I had to nip out. I would tell them to go, you know, if you want to submit the formal flexible working request, because I don't think he has. And secondly, to accept it, just to do it on a trial basis for 3 months to see what effect it has on the business. And because he chose to relocate, I wouldn't pay him for his accommodation or his travel costs, but that's me being a bit hard-hearted.
But the challenge that they might have, Michael, is that there's some sort of implied agreement, because they've
there isn't. Yeah, but I don't know whether she said, well, we'll do it while you're on furlough, or we'll do it permanently.
Yeah.
And if she said we'll do it permanently, she is snookered. And then she can renegotiate his contract with him. But again, if there are other people doing a similar kind of job and don't get those benefits, she will have a problem with them of some kind.
Yeah. All right. Great stuff. Thank you.
I'm sorry I keep nipping in and out.
All right. Really appreciate it, mate. So, one of the things that came up during the case study was like that team cohesion thing, particularly during like post lockdown. You know, how do we get our teams together and just get them working like teams again? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to integrate it into your weekly operational practices. So I'm advising companies about this now, and I'm saying, okay, look, if on a Monday morning you have a team huddle where you're just dealing with, you know, sort of hard operational things, right? Well, we've got to get, 20 prescriptions out. Build into that a conversation around how people are feeling, how last week was, how do we want to offer each other, sort of support, build it in so that it becomes an organic part of the way we work, because it really helps to pick up things early out. So conversation I had earlier today, a client has spent quite a lot of time and energy recruiting a senior pharmacist. The person's only been in the business 10 weeks and they're giving a week's notice. So I said, well, you know, what conversations have you had? How has it come as such a shock? Because if someone is unhappy about any aspect of their work, if I'm that person's manager, I need to, you know, you can pick it up early on so that you can actually address it before it becomes, you know, a cataclysmic event. And really, they hadn't had those conversations, sadly for them. So they're now going to try and see if they can retrieve the situation. So I think the key thing is keeping it simple, building conversations, regular points, every single, doesn't have to be long. You know, there are times where, you know, take something quickly offline. If you pick up some negativity, pick it up, have that conversation. That conversation, you know, that person might not be in the same space, but, you know, arrange a remote meeting. It's all about conversations. We can't stress enough now that, you know, kind of going forward, we really need to become expert at having conversations with our people, not leave things to, you know, happen. And then you find that you're just completely out of kilter.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing as well, I mean, that alludes to another point that certainly I've not been, you know, I've had to learn a lot over the years about that. You know, don't avoid that difficult conversation. That difficult conversation never gets any easier, does it?
No, it gets harder. The longer you leave it, the harder it becomes. In actual fact, it only becomes difficult when it's difficult, because you've not picked up things in a timely way and fed back, you know. And you know, a lot of organizations are sad to say are not very good at this, you know. Because they promote managers based on technical competence, and they just assume that you're going to be a great manager. I'm seeing these fallouts.
Excuse me, nodding my head, because I'm having two circumstances like this already.
Yeah. And this is, you know, saying to managers, you need to have conversations. It's as simple and as hard as that.
And you need to, I mean, what I'm doing is I'm dealing with a bunch of millennials, which is always a challenge for somebody my age.
Who's just a little bit older than millennial.
Yeah, just a bit. I'm an old-fashioned, unreconstructed baby boomer, so that gives you some idea. But these people, it's a tech sort of startup, and they're going great guns, and they've got teams all over the world, and they've just promoted 3 guys who are good at their job to become coordinators. They don't want to call them managers, they're called coordinators. And guess what? The relationship between them and their teams has broken down. Why? Because they've got no idea how to manage people of different cultures, different abilities, and whatever. So I'm putting together, you know, they said, can you give me a 3-hour training course? I said, yeah, I can give you a 3-hour training course, but I'm not going to convert them to managers in 3 hours. But I can point the way, which is what I'm doing. I suppose, so you know, it happens a lot, especially in small companies. People get, well, even large companies for that matter, people get promoted because they're good at their job, not because they've got any management training whatsoever.
I suppose the other thing is as well is that, you know, just like, is that individual's skill set, just because they're a good technician or a good communicator with clients, or does that make them a good manager of people? Because
no, but it would help if you tell them what to look, you know, obvious pitfalls, what to look out for. Yeah. I mean, as you know, Chris, I worked for Ford for 25 years. I was a great buyer, and then they made me a senior buyer. They didn't give me management training. They did once I became a senior buyer, but that was after the event, not before the event.
How long do you reckon it takes to be a good manager? I'm asking for a friend.
I think you need to have short, focused management coaching conversations. Every single, you know, when you promote the individual, you know, you start it within the first week.
Yeah, great, thank you. Hannah-Lee, sorry, we went down help Chris to be a better manager road. Talk to me about what you're advising this particular people in this case.
Firstly, I'm going to echo what Yvonne said. They need to communicate. They need to know what everybody wants, what, you know, if they've all got these goals that are directly conflicting with each other, it's just not going to work no matter what any of us tell them to do.
Yeah. And that starts at the leadership side, doesn't it? I mean, they're not talking. So what are the teams getting?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's going to be the first thing. The next is to work out exactly what is going on with their articles, who is a shareholder, who is a director, what documentation they actually have in place, and whether they actually know what that means. From that, depending on what those discussions are, if it's a case of maybe they need a unanimous director's decision, maybe they need to consider powers of attorney. So if any of them lose capacity, make sure that the rest of the directors can carry on, or change the articles, depending on that. They need to assess their own personal finances, you know, see what it is that they're actually looking to do. Jeff might be better off taking the capital out of the business. It might be that he doesn't need the capital at all and it's just going to influence his IHT. If he just needs the income, you're better off leaving it there. He can keep the shares so long as everybody's happy. Just step down as director. You know, it doesn't mean the same thing. With that, you've got to look at the wills. You've got to look at what they've got, potentially giving the business interest specifically under the wills. And yeah, I think the other thing I would say, they need to get an idea of what the business is actually worth. You know, because all of this is going to be stuck on the fact of you can't make a decision unless you know what you're potentially selling, giving up, or potentially gifting on death.
But then we don't know, you know, I mean, again, with our financial planners hat on, we don't even know whether Jeff is never going to run out of money again. Actually, he's never going to run out of money and has got a big IHT issue, or he has a shortfall that he needs to do something with. And you just can't make decisions unless you know that, really. So
you're going to have to delve into all of those finances overall. And the same applies for the other, for Rod and Jane. You know, they're saying about potentially remunerating him for the work he's done. Is there money there to do that? You know, if they got the finances to buy him out potentially.
Janet, can you help me understand something on that? Because I don't think I'm 100% clear. Can Jane and her husband buy Jeff out from company funds?
Can they buy Jeff? Well, I mean, if they want to personally own the shares, then potentially not. But
no, they need to buy them personally, don't
they? Yeah. But if the company wants to retain the shares, then the company could buy the shares off them, and then they would sit in the company ready for, you know, then it's what value you place on them when the remaining directors buy them. So, and it's quite a subjective valuation then, isn't it, as to what are they worth. So there is a way of navigating it, but they couldn't directly buy them with the company's funds. No.
The shares sit in the company waiting for someone to purchase it. They won't be diluted or like.
No. I mean, the shares would sit then owned in the company as part of the share capital, and then if the remaining directors want to buy them, you know, what is the value for them then? You know, that's you know, that doesn't have to be what the balance sheet value is. It is what the, you know, they decide what the value is. So it's a bit of a strange one, really. You know, they're going to decide what they buy them for, really, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's no obligation for them to get an independent valuation either, is there?
Not if it's not in the you know, again, down to the memorandums and articles. You know, as long as there's nothing in there that places that restriction, then no, they literally hold a board meeting between them and you know. I
suppose the challenge you've got is what's considered fair by both parties, isn't it? You know, like sort of, you know, Jeff might have one sort of perception, whereas Jane and her hubby might have a different one.
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So as we're doing the last sort of round robin, any other sort of final points? Other professionals you'd want to get involved in supporting you with this client? Would you even take them on?
I think it was a case that there was lots for a lot of input on this case, and I think definitely I would want to have some input from the likes of yourself and HR solicitors putting together them agreements. So I think there was a lot there to call on people. And it would be wrong for me to take that client on if they weren't prepared to take further advice as well.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I had a conversation, and again, one sort of inner circle we will do around, like our own businesses and talking about some of the challenges we face as professionals, because I think that's interesting in itself. But I had a client today where they really needed a strategic plan. They wanted me to focus on they had a really messy SaaS arrangement that needed unpicking that we need to do. And I said, look, I'm not doing the SaaS work unless we do the strategic plan, because I've got to get you to a point where, we know where all of it fits in. I mean, great, no worries, we love that. It was like, fine. But I think if it was just the SaaS work, I wouldn't have felt that I was adding enough value. Even though it would have solved their problem for a fee, it just wouldn't have worked with me. I
think it's quite a difficult one, because particularly you've grown your business. A lot of the perception is that my accountant will sort that out, and they literally feel like we're going to tick every box going, and it's quite a challenge to convince them. No, we don't know everything. You need to now source these other professionals. It might be we've run payroll for one director for the last 5 years. Now they're starting to employ, and they say you really need some proper contracts of employment and HR advice. And they're like, oh no, you can do all that, can't you? No.
And weirdly, I think accountants sit in a unique position, don't they? Where we've got accountant clients who wouldn't do their own financial planning, but their clients go to them to go, oh, you can organise that. Interesting.
100%. Yeah.
I don't know what you do about that.
No.
Raymond, final thoughts. Other professionals you'd want to work with? Would you work with this client? Where would you go?
Well, the answer to the question, would I work with them, is yes, if they were open to the challenge and actually effectively taking it all apart and putting it all back together again. I put down accountants, HR professionals. I think there's something around the culture of the company as well and how they want that to be moving forwards. And then can I be a little bit provocative to the accountant in the room? In the sense about when your clients come to you and ask you, can you do all these things? I wonder if accountants hide behind their professional independence just a tad too much when they say, we can't do this. What the client's not looking for is the accountant to do it. They're looking for the accountant to make sure that the right people come in the door to help them. And I think sometimes as professionals, we not hide, that's the wrong word, but I think sometimes we put our professionalism and our independence so far, almost wear it like a badge of honor, when actually it doesn't impact our independence. What it does is about finding trusted others to come work with us, with the client.
Okay, that wasn't as provocative as I would have assumed. I think that's a completely fair point.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think you're right, Raymond. It's it's a tough one, isn't it? And is once you find somebody that you can work with and you trust with, then I'm always quite happy to make that sort of connection on. But it is. I mean, I think we've had this discussion, Chris. It's a tough one because whoever you suggest that your client works with suddenly becomes an extension of you, and however they perform or don't perform is again a reflection on you. So
I must admit, as an HR person, a lot of my referrals do come from accountants that I've built up a relationship with over the years. And because they keep on referring me, I must be giving a reasonable service, because otherwise that wouldn't happen. I need to talk to you, Janet.
You do, definitely.
But I completely get where Janet's coming from. You know, when we refer,
yeah, because when you refer, it's your name's on the line.
Our professional reputation on the line.
Yeah.
So, and we appreciate that when people refer to us, it's their professional reputation on the line, and that is a jump. Actually,
yeah, but I think that's missing an opportunity. See, I think that misses the opportunity, and Yvonne can smile at this one, because when you actively work together rather than in a referred relationship with a client, I think the opportunity and the truly way that you engage with the client, and you effectively run it like a project, because Yvonne and I have worked like this before. It's a different relationship to, I think you should work with this HR person.
Right, no, I get that.
But Raymond, it does work like that. I mean, say an accountant refers me on to talk to someone to help them out with the problem, I will always then say, go back and make sure your accountant is happy with what I've said and done. So it is collaborative. It isn't.
Well, you know what? I go further than that. I mean, Janet and I have got mutual clients, and I'm quite happy picking up the phone to Janet and saying, right, what do you think? What have I missed? What do I need to take into account? Because I think that's where you add the most value, isn't it? You know, having that rounded perspective on supporting somebody to achieve what they need to achieve. Yeah, it's good. Sarah, talk to me about final thoughts and where you'd start.
I don't, not much more to add. What I did want to do is just share a very quick story, actually, on the working remotely or not. I was talking to a startup company earlier today. They are based in Glasgow, so things are a little bit cheaper up there, but all of their staff work from home. None of them now want to go back into the office. And so what they've agreed is that everybody works from home, but one day a week, they all go into the local Citizen M hotel. It costs £7.50 per person for the day to have a desk, you know, and so that's all 20 employees. And that's what they do. And they have lunch once a week, and they have that, you know, kind of team bonding. They get all of those meetings out the way, and then for the rest of the time, everybody's happy at home, got that work-life balance. And I just thought I'd share that.
That's a good solution, depending on what the business is, obviously.
Exactly, and really cost-effective compared to having.
You know what? I reckon virtual office space and those sort of arrangements, particularly in town, are going to be huge over the next
massively
year.
Totally agree. I'm so sorry, I need to rush because I've got another meeting, but it's been lovely meeting you all. Speak to you soon. Bye.
Michael, final thoughts?
No, I've said enough.
And Hannah Lee, final thoughts?
That they've let things get into a bit of a mess and just need to sort it all out.
and last but not least, Yvonne.
I just would like to get Annalee's contact, actually. To have a conversation.
Raz, if you can make that arrangement offline, we can. I'll get Raz to do that.
I'll make just give me the contact.
We'll make the introduction.
Okay, to send me Janet's contact, because I would like to have a conversation with him, whether it leads anywhere or not.
Cool. All right, Raz, you on that?
I am, mate.
Of course, he's always on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are back next month. Live at the CME Centre, so if you can come along next month, that'd be really good. All tickets, we've got a capacity for individuals joining us live. We're always going to have a Zoom link, but we've only got 4 tickets left for the live event. So if you can't come along, fine, but if you can, please take a look at the link that I'll send you.
I think I've registered.
And
what is it, mate?
I don't know, Michael. Raz can check. Raz will make sure that everybody's.
I'll send some more invites out, mate.
Thank you.
No worries. All right, great stuff.
Okay, great.
Good day, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Good to see you, Raymond.
It's great to see you too.
Thanks ever so.
We'll catch
Take
up.
care.
Okay.
Bye.
We need to have a coffee, Raymond.
We do. We
Yeah.
definitely do.
Okay. Contact you offline. Yeah.
I would.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks.
Cheers, Chris.